You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us. And before we get started with this week's special guest, I want to remind you of all the homework that you have to do. Make sure you get on iTunes, leave us a rating and a review. Those things are blowing up. They're helping this podcast grow. And your ratings and reviews mean a lot to us. They let us know how to make the show better. And of course, they help the popularity of the show, and that gets more people to tune in and listen. I want to remind you we have sponsors. Make sure you're supporting them all. A list of our sponsors are on our website, hazardground.com. Also on hazardground.com. Previous guests, more pics, more bio information, everything you need to know. And of course, make sure you check us out on all the other ways you can listen to the Hazard Ground: Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, all that's there. This week, our guest is Trey Grissom. Trey is a Marine captain who has deployed to Afghanistan after attending the Naval Academy. And Trey currently serves at Marine Corps Barracks in Washington, D.C., and handles all of the honor guard ceremonies for the National Capital Region for the Marine Corps. Certainly one of the more high-profile jobs and one of the more interesting jobs in all of the military, because every branch has their own sort of honor guard, if you will, that handles all the ceremonies for the president and things of that nature. So let's welcome him into the podcast. He is Trey Grissom. Trey, thanks for being here, man.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
All right, so tell us, Naval Academy, how did you get your start in the military?
So that's actually kind of interesting, because my granddad was in the Army back in Korea, did a short stint. And other than that, didn't really have any sort of influences in the family that kind of led me towards making that decision. But what did was the opportunity to go play football at the Naval Academy, and kind of late junior year, early senior year in high school, coaches started coming down, and they kind of had a relationship with my head coach, and still didn't really know what it was all about or what the back end of the 4 years would look like. But basically, long story short, had the opportunity, weighed my options there, state schools, a couple other opportunities to play football. And then after talking with my dad, he was like, yeah, man, you'll have a job coming out of college, and, you either be a second lieutenant or an ensign in the Navy. And I was like, well, what in the world is this? What is this actually going to mean? But then when I showed up, it all kind of started coming into me leading me down the road that I wanted to. But just interesting. Basically, wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have had the opportunity to play football, because I don't think that I would have had the interest at the time to join the military. So.
Well, were you getting looked at by other regular colleges for football as well? I mean, was that something that was on the radar for you to definitely play football?
Yeah. I had a couple 1AA offers, a couple D2 offers, and then I had preferred walk-ons to North Carolina State University of North Carolina Chapel Hill, and then Virginia Tech. And those kind of came on late, but I was like, well, let me go take this opportunity to have, school paid for, play Division I football, which is kind of the story behind a lot of the guys that wind up at Navy. That's kind of their their one or two D1 offers. And then it kind of took off from there. So.
Well, if you had a legit offer from, Virginia Tech or North Carolina State, would you have still think you would chosen the Naval Academy?
I think that I honestly would have gone to North Carolina State. I grew up a State fan. I was 10, 15 minutes down the road, and going there to watch games. Growing up, it would have just been an honor in a sense too, to be from the hometown, if you will, and then be playing college ball right down the road. Would have been closer to family. And that was kind of my mindset at 17, 18 years old. But looking back, obviously super fortunate, and would not have changed a thing with the way things wound up turning out.
So when you get to the Naval Academy, I mean, football is probably in the front of your mind, and all this military stuff comes second. What were your expectations as you enrolled as a freshman, or a plebe, if you will?
Yeah, plebe year. That was a doozy for sure. Leaving home at 18, which is, a lot of kids that age, that's all they want to do is get out of their hometown. And so in that regard, it was neat. But showing up on induction day, or I day, as they call it, back in June of 2007, it was a pretty traumatic experience that day, stepping away from my parents, similar to, I guess, the way when Marines enlist, going down to Parris Island to get on the buses to go step on the yellow footprints. It was kind of the same thing. As soon as we entered Alumni Hall, which is our big basketball gymnasium on campus. It was just yelled at here, run there, do this, stand here, look that way, don't look at me, don't speak, yes sir, no ma'am, all that good stuff. And then that was kind of how it all kicked off. It wasn't just hey, this is welcome to college, here's your dorm room, blah, blah, blah. It was, you're going to run around all day, getting the gear you need. And it's going to be about an 8-10 hour process. And then you'll see your room at the end of the day, have a chance to hug your parents on the cheek once you get your head shaved and you're in your little uniform that they put you up in. And then they're off, and you are focused on their indoctrination, if you will, for the next 4 to 6 weeks in Annapolis in the summertime.
At what point did you think that you had made a mistake?
I've always kind of been the type that once I start something, I'm going to finish it. And similar to, I think, most of the folks that you've had on the show so far, kind of that same mentality. So I don't know if I ever thought I made a mistake. I just knew that it was going to take a lot of guts and a lot of willpower and a lot of mentorship from those around me to pull us all through.
All right, we'll get back to the football part later. I do want to discuss a little bit more of your time at the Naval Academy, because you're similar to me. Like when I went into ROTC, I had no idea what I was doing. Like I just signed up to pay for college, and this was prior to 9/11, and it was like, I'm going to do this because it's the fastest way to point A to point B, and that's pay for college, and I'll figure out the rest as I go along. But I didn't really know what I was getting into. So as you kind of made your way through your first year, did you figure out what you wanted to be in the Navy, and how did that process go?
Yeah, it actually was fairly quick. Once I had a chance to be around some of the upperclassmen football players and assess personality types and the 07 class, 08 classes after they graduated, what all those guys went and did. And the guys that once I started getting recruited and started gaining interest in the academy, what certain players chose to do with their service assignment, and showing up basically day 2 and seeing the way the Marines carried themselves, interacted with the plebes and even the other, sophomores, juniors, seniors that were training us. I was kind of set on wanting to become a Marine, and kind of coupling that with watching the actual Marines and seeing what upperclassmen and the influences that those guys had on me kind of led me to pretty early on knowing that I wanted to be a Marine, and kind of always stuck with want to be an infantry guy. And so that's kind of how it all started.
Did anybody try to talk you into a different direction once you had figured out that you wanted to be a Marine?
Yeah, and this is funny because my buddies will still pick at me every now and then, which nothing against my Submariner buddies, because I've got even guys that I played ball with that went subs, but they tried to get me to go in that direction. A couple of the company officers, when it comes time to them, because subs they kind of get the least amount of interest, but they throw a hefty sign-on bonus at you to get you to go that route. Because you go down to nuke school, and that's, by all accounts, very, very, very tough down in Charleston. They basically come out, I think, 6 credits shy of a nuke power degree. Yeah, so it looks good on paper, but then again, didn't really fit my personality type. And growing up kind of the way I did in football and being the type A guy, knew that I'd want to surround myself with infantry Marines. So they were never able to fully sway me to go in that direction. What
exactly does one do with a nuke power degree? Is you now authorized to push a button? Is that what it is?
So I think it just has to, yeah, I think it has to do with understanding all the systems of how the nuclear engines work on both surface vessels and submarines. So,
well, I think most of us understand push button, mass detonation, end of story. There's my nuke power degree right there. Okay,
and that's probably why I'm a grunt.
There you go. Okay, so you finish your 4 years at the Naval Academy, and you're going to be an officer in the Marine Corps. When you look back on your experience at the Naval Academy, obviously you have great memories there, but what stood out to you the most?
What stood out to me the most definitely would be, just a couple quick ones, would be my roommates got settled in with, and I actually had last dibs on roommates freshman year because I got taken out of plebe summer 2 weeks early to go to football camp, which was not any easier, even though they all said it would be. 2 days and 107 degrees wasn't fun.
No,
but,
doesn't sound it.
But definitely my roommates. I had 3 roommates living in tight spaces. I'm actually the best man at one of my roommates' weddings here coming up. And then the relationships that I was able to develop with my own classmates and then the guys that were graduating a year after us on the football team. Just being able to really get close. I mean, guys from all over the country, meeting their families at games. And really, I mean, I keep in touch with even their families to this day, 6-7 years removed from it all. And it's just real powerful that we still all have each other's backs, just due to the type of the caliber of guys that come out of that place.
So you're going through the Naval Academy from 2007 to 2011, and meanwhile there are 2 wars just raging through this entire time. And you're going to go be an infantryman in the Marines. You know what's next down the road. What was kind of your thought process as you're going through this whole collegiate experience, knowing that that's the end state?
I think it's just something that we all knew that we needed to do. We sort of had a calling. That was our opportunity. You know, the chance to play Division I football and be a part of one of the service academies that our country has to offer. Understanding that, you know, we're fighting in 2 different countries and not really knowing what all is going to come of it. You know, are you going to miss it? Are we going to get through our training in time? Or the units that we're going to go to even going to be deploying there? And seeing kind of the end game, it wasn't really a clear sight picture. Although 08, 9, 10 time frame, things were still going pretty strong. And then graduating and, you know, year and a half of training to come on the back end of that, all of us just wanted to get there. But it was kind of coming down where, you know, whether we were going to get there or not was kind of the question.
So there was, I mean, you're talking about the state overall of the wars. At that point in time, Iraq was running down. So, again, Iraq closes out in 2011 for the most part. I was there for it, so I know. And you're talking about the year and a half train up after you get out of the Naval Academy to go through your initial Marine officer training. So now you're moving into 2012, and you're hearing 2013 Afghanistan is winding down, and you're telling me that you guys had a sense that you wanted to go, but you didn't think you were going to get a shot? Exactly.
And that is what wound up happening to the majority of my peers. Because I did a 6-month stint of temporary assigned duty coaching the sprint football team at Navy. After I graduated through December, checked into the basic school at Quantico, and that's a 6-month course there, basically where you compete for your military occupational specialty. And then from there, summer of 2012, had about a month and a half off to get ready for the infantry officers course, which is there. And then I graduated December of 12. January 13, I checked into 1-9 and found out we were going to Afghanistan in September. And we would be the second to last infantry battalion from the East Coast to be down at Helmand out of Leatherneck, basically closing it down, waiting for Victor 1-2 to come in and really bring Leatherneck down, collapse everything down to Camp Bastion, which was the British base adjacent to us off to the east, and basically bring everything home. So knowing that I had a shot was amazing, and it was a good learning experience there. But a lot of my peers didn't have that chance to get over there.
And just for clarification, what Trey is talking about, Helmand Province, when he says Helmand, that's what he's referring to, the Helmand Province in Afghanistan. And Camp Leatherneck, as you referred to it, Leatherneck was a base there. And when it happened in the drawdown in Iraq, they slowly started closing bases and consolidating units until eventually they could completely get out of the area of operations. So just for clarification, as far as Trey is talking about, when you found out you were going, what were your feelings? Were you excited?
Yeah, I was fortunate for the opportunity, although my family was not so psyched. And I was recently engaged to my wife now, which we just had our first child on April 14th on Good Friday. And luckily she stuck with me through it all up to this point. But I got married, or we had set a date for, I think, May 18th of 13. And so checked in January, left for a couple months to do mountain warfare training. Came back, got married, and knew that, between May and September, it was time to figure out how to be a husband, and also to gear these Marines towards going over and fighting, for in a couple different manners, not really knowing what to expect based on the intelligence reports and understanding what our area of operation exactly would be like. So
before we get to the military stuff, what did your wife say to you before you left?
She was with me even before I selected infantry. And
okay, so she knew this whole deal?
Yeah, she knew what she was kind of getting herself into. We kind of went back and forth on it, but we were able to compromise, and she's stronger than I am, because obviously we know the type of spouse it takes to get through the kind of stuff that we have to deal with. So
you end up getting orders to go to Afghanistan. What are you told prior to leaving? What's the mission, and what were your expectations?
Well, it was basically that we would be operating out of Camp Leatherneck, and for those that had fought in Helmand, Singin, Marja, anywhere to the north and south, east / Karga, all those areas kind of adjacent to the green zone, if you will, which is the Helmand River Valley. And it was a good distance to the east of Leatherneck, but that's where we flew into, which most units flew into, and then they push out to their forward operating bases or their or wherever their small outposts would be. But that's exactly where we were operating out of for the whole 8 months that we were there. And it was knowing that we'd be going to Leatherneck, the guys that had already deployed saying, this is just going to be, eating at the chow hall in the morning, not really doing much, and basically just providing perimeter security. But as things started to develop and things changed once we got there, my company actually was fortunate enough to be tasked with almost a raid type mission that heliborne operations, and the only other units that were doing it were our MARSOC units that were over there, and the British para-regiments, so the British Special Force guys that were there at the time. And so the first 2 months were a company basically getting tasked by division by the Marine Expeditionary Force, and we had any assets that we wanted pushed to us for the planning process and for pre-mission, during mission, post-mission, all the intelligence collection assets, close air support, indirect fire support, all that good stuff. And that's where coming into that and getting prepared for that was tough on the short stint when we found out that that's what we were going to be doing back stateside, going and refreshing on heliborne operations, not really having done too many practice runs, if you will, back stateside in order to prepare for something like that. So it was hit the ground, boots running, and I think we were there for 2.5 weeks, and our first mission popped. And so it was definitely a quick turnaround to get prepared, to get everything squared away, do a turnover, understand the areas that we were going into, and kind of get the battle rhythm down for what was going. So it was definitely drinking from a fire hose.
And just one more piece of clarification for everybody as far as Helmand Province is concerned. If you find Kandahar on a map directly to the west, take like your left thumb, and it's kind of the shape of a thumb that touches from Kandahar would be the center at your knuckle and goes all the way to the southern border of Pakistan, right in the middle of central Afghanistan. So it's a pretty large area. And the reason I point that out is because there aren't Afghanistan, the layout is so mountainous and the terrain is so tough to traverse that there weren't a lot of bases in a given area if you weren't near a metropolis. So I guess where I'm leading with this is because of the location of where you guys were, how big is the area that you were in, your area of operations? How big was it?
So it could give or take, but it was roughly 200 square kilometers, which is obviously bigger than you can really do anything with as far as getting involved with the local populace and really establishing a good rapport. And so it was, after we did the heliborne operations for those first couple months, we transitioned to mounted patrolling operations. And you're talking, you have to drive once you leave out of the northern or southern gate. at Camp Leatherneck to get to some of these villages. It would take an hour just to drive to be able to dismount to see the first local village outside of the area, because at this point all the local operating bases and combat outposts had collapsed down to Leatherneck. And I didn't mention that earlier, but so it basically increased our surface area that we had to cover, but it also allowed the Taliban to collapse closer to Leatherneck and to kind of infiltrate some of these villages that had been pretty heavily protected months and years past.
And to give people a little bit more, I guess, visual representation of Afghanistan, as Trey mentions, how long it would take it to find two villages, it's feasible that there are two villagers who live less than 10 miles apart who would never cross paths in their lifetime just because of the terrain of Afghanistan. They would never know the other one was there because unless they walked it and traversed over a mountain sideways, essentially, they would never find anybody else. And that's kind of the terrain that you're dealing with. And when you're that obstacle is there for you guys, what other challenges did it present that you weren't prepared for?
Shoot, talk about mine roller recovery for one. We used to break mine rollers at the Rapid when we started having to drive around in said terrain. And you're right. These folks they have their little similar to kind of like Nissan Frontiers, little bongo trucks,
yep.
Small motorcycles for those that are kind of unaware of the type of vehicles that they have. But yeah, it's all small little villages, and they're farmers, and they're making their opium. They're farming their fields, and they're lucky if they have a water pump in order to be able to water their fields. Everything else was just pretty much blackout conditions. They're out there up in the day and then in during the night, and never really saw anybody out at night. So that would obviously raise suspicions. But yeah, there's two huge wadis, which are basically just for everyone else, kind of like a river basin that dried out, and some of them were almost a mile wide in between some of these villages just to the east of Camp Leatherneck, and traversing those to be able to get down in them across to the other side. Pretty tough for us, but for the smaller vehicles and the local population, they kind of use those as roads because they were kind of flat themselves. They didn't really have to do too much. But
when you were there, did you find that the fighters were still as the bad guys, when I say fighters, were still as determined as ever? Because, I'm not as familiar with Afghanistan as I am with Iraq. I did a couple of short stints in Afghanistan, but I didn't spend a lot of time there. So I'm just curious how much they were still in the fight by the time you had gotten there.
So they were able to really test the waters, and I think they were still as passionate as ever about, keeping us honest, kind of restricting our movement per se, just like we were them. And they knew that our ROEs had been clamped down. They knew it was tough for us to fight them. They knew that they could get in and out, shoot, move a lot easier and a lot quicker than we had the ability to. So closer to the green zone areas, the more the more restrictive areas, I guess you could say, based on our hires, commander's intent, and some of the areas that we weren't really allowed to go. If you ever push in there based on intelligence coming down for a high valued individual, or any sort of operation that needed to be addressed to where we'd have to push into these areas, we'd go pretty large scale, at least a company size element, roughly 150, 200 Marines, and Afghan special forces, or just the local Afghan army, with all the enablers included. And it would be, you get into some pretty hairy fights out there. But they wouldn't really collapse too much on Leatherneck because of the security posture. And they knew they couldn't come within about 5 clicks of the base to really try to decisively engage anyone. But they would absolutely decisively engage you if you were about 15 clicks out, and kind of a few terrain features in where the big G bosses and the blimps with the cameras could see, in order to allow them to shoot and move and get in and out.
How much did your Marine training prepare you for? I don't want to ask how much it prepared you for combat. I'm talking about the mental portion of it. How much physically? I know Marines are always ready. It's just what you guys do. But how much did it prepare you mentally for combat?
I think the infantry officers course does a phenomenal job of preparing you mentally as well as tactically. I mean, just the amount of information you have to process, the type of ranges, and with the assets, combined arms, everything that they're able to give to the students really does prepare you well. I mean, the first month or so is kind of all individual, carrying a lot of weight, moving long distances, working that mental toughness piece, trying to beat timelines, kind of just mind game type stuff. Hike out to a range, shoot, hike back, and just not a lot of rest time, not a lot of downtime, and then it's just on to the next mission. And so it was back to back to back, not a lot of time to really relax or really gather your thoughts, if you will, because the next thing was coming down the pipe. So to pack as much as they were able to, and the 10, 11 weeks that they're afforded or allotted for each class, it really does force you mentally to sharpen what you're able to process, putting out products, being able to gather your Marines. And at this point, it's all your peers. So, being able to lead your peers, other officers, is in a sense a little bit tougher than leading 18-year-old guys that just hit the fleet, kind of the same as you once you first get to your first unit.
How much in that moment to be ready to fight, to make the decisive action, to pull the trigger and things of that nature? I mean, was there any hesitation on your part?
No, there never was. I mean, because in the heat of it, it really you fall back to the level of training that you've worked up to, and basically the only difference is that instead of fighting at or shooting at mechanical green silhouette targets, or just trying to put artillery on a tire stack, you can feel the heat of the moment. You can feel the rounds snapping. You know that you're in it, and it's basically just working through the same thought processes in that type of environment. So you're already used to the internal friction. I mean, you've got all your gear, you're tired, you're hungry, you're hot, this and that, uncomfortable, already been used to that. Used to an instructor yelling at you to speed up, to get this, to get that. You need to do this. All right, this just happened over here. How are you going to address that situation? What are you going to do with your Marines over here? So the friction of an environment such as actually fighting in combat is created by the staff that trains you to say, hey, yep, you passed, you're an infantry officer, now you can go to the fleet. And we think that in the event that you have to face the type of scenarios that we just created for you in combat, that you'll succeed.
Is there an engagement that happened during your deployment that stands out?
Yeah, there were a couple. The one that obviously is kind of tough for me and some of the guys. We were out one day. This was 2 days before Christmas, December 23rd of 2013, and we had been engaged by a sniper relatively close to Leatherneck. A couple of days, had seen him out the other platoons that were out at the time. This area, we wanted to go in and kind of try to weed him out, talk to some locals, kind of figure out what we could do to try to start building a package against this guy, because it was it was later in the day. We had been out, had heard a couple shots ring out from the guys, because basically what we do is we use the vehicles to cover the dismounted movement, and had been out for a while. Started an engagement my guys wanted to pursue, because they had talked to a couple of locals and knew kind of the direction that these guys were headed. So time really wasn't of the essence. So I said, yeah, we'll stay out a little bit longer, and then pushed right about to the time that we were going to get back up, remount the trucks and head back. And one of my squad leaders, Sergeant Daniel Vasilian, he's from Abington, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. He was shot one round just outside of his plate carrier, left side. It severed his pulmonary artery, and he bled out within about 5 minutes. It was nothing that any of us could do. Once he was shot, he kind of exited a doorway. The shot came from within 400 meters, which was a lot closer than we're normally engaged with small arms and direct fire weapons. And caught in the bird, they tried their best, and there was nothing they could do. And so that was obviously a tough ride back, knowing that at this point in the war, an engagement like that, small arms, losing a guy in that fashion, that was kind of a tough pill for everyone to swallow. But guy was a true warrior. He actually did an interview the night prior on December 22nd with a combat camera that was in the same outpost that we were. It's on DVids. His name's Sergeant Daniel Vasilian. Pretty powerful message that he spits out the night before he was killed in action back in 2013.
When you look back on it, do you regret the decision to stay out longer? Because you could have made a decision. So now, guys, let's let it go. No one got hit. Let's go back and just reset. We'll go at him tomorrow. And
that was kind of the thought that I was wrestling with so hard. Was for me, I was with the trucks, positioning the trucks because I had two very competent non-commissioned officers out there with me that were running the show on the ground. And by all accounts, the feedback was good. They said, "Hey, sir, we've got this guy kind of pattern. We know what to expect. Some of the local nationals are giving us what we feel like is trustworthy information, and so we'd like to be able to pursue just a bit." And really, it kind of went against, I guess, what our mission was overall, which was the local security of actual Camp Leatherneck. But my hire was good with it, and so didn't ever really feel like it was a wrong decision. It was just not really putting a defense or a shield or kind of a barrier, if you will, in between where this guy actually took the shot from and where the dismounts were on the ground.
Well, and just to kind of interject a personal thought, and this applies more to combat than anything else, but we see it in all of the walks of life. People get so caught up in the result of things, and they think that it is definitive. And I always try to tell people, results don't always define whether it's a good decision or a bad decision. And as you just said, you checked with hire, you did all the things that you were supposed to do. Everybody was a thumbs up. Everybody was a go. You had the right people in the right place. There's no reason not to. And so from that standpoint, what happened was a bad result, but it wasn't a bad decision. And I think it's important to create that distinction.
Absolutely. And we, doing all the right things on the ground. Guys were doing all the right things. I mean, proper reporting procedures. They were, guys weren't out there just running and gunning Wild Wild West style, if you will. And so it was a tough pill to swallow, just because of knowing that, hey, war's dying down. For what really?
And sorry to cut you off, Trey, as well, but people need to understand something about combat for those who have never been there. When stuff like that happens, I told everybody, I said, I didn't survive 2 deployments because I did everything right, and those who didn't survive did something wrong. I didn't not sustain any serious injuries because I did everything right, and the people who did sustain serious injuries did something wrong. The combat is so unpredictable that you can do everything right and still have a bad result, and you can do everything wrong and still have a favorable result. That is the ultimate wild card that combat is, and there is no way to reconcile that, and it's different for everybody.
That is very, very true. Very true.
So beyond that, you lose a guy. Was that the only guy you lost on your deployment?
Yeah, we had a couple others in the battalion that didn't make it home, but he was the only one from our company that didn't make it back.
And what was the mood like after that? I mean, obviously no one's happy, but did it change the overall morale of the deployment?
So what it actually did was it lit a spark. It lit a fire and the rest of my Marines and the other 2 platoons, because we had 4 platoons in our company, but our weapons platoon, which was that 4th platoon, had been distributed to the line infantry platoons to be machine gunners in our turrets, and the mortarmen were basically just kind of riflemen, if you will, and the assaultmen were essentially doing the same thing. They kind of would be specialized for company missions or higher missions. But it definitely lit a spark in the other two platoons. And, they wanted to find this guy, obviously. And instead of kind of cowering down and guys saying, oh, man, like this is really what we could be facing, life or death, I think it really lit a spark and really kind of put a little drive in guys to really go out and work even that much harder, not only for, in his memory, but to make sure that it didn't happen again. Because we knew that there was at least if not a school trained, somebody that had some pretty decent designated marksmanship type training that was out there looking to try to pick us off. So
the next question I'm going to ask you is for a reason, because it's going to serve us later on here in this episode. But I assume that there was a memorial service for the sergeant who was killed?
There was, and it was actually that night. So we got back in, and first thing, once we got our trucks back in the wire, a company commander came out, gave me a hug, kind of gave me a pat on the back, and I pulled my Marines off to the side once we had gotten everything unloaded, and we kind of spilled a few tears together. And I mean, I definitely wore my emotions on my sleeve for that one, but didn't really care because, I didn't need to try to act like I was somebody that I wasn't in front of my guys, because they always see right through that. So we were able to, that night, head over to Camp Bastion. They did a dignified transfer. We did a memorial service, watched his body loaded up. And, I mean, it was basically anybody that was not decisively engaged in their line of work was out there from all branches, both bases. And so it was really nice to see the support to send him off back home to his family, and kind of bring closure to a terrible situation relatively quickly. I think it kind of helps some guys out. And then from that point on, we were able to, and the Marines were able to kind of grieve together and lean on one another.
And you had this set up with the boots and the rifle and the dog tags and the Kevlar helmet and everything. Okay, that's standard for those. You can Google pictures of it on the internet and see it. And the only reason I bring that question up is kind of to fast forward after your deployment to your current assignment at Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C., where handling memorial ceremonies of fallen soldiers is one of the responsibilities you currently have. And the follow-up question is, did that particular instance in Afghanistan and that service, did it help you better serve in the role that you're in now?
It definitely brings it full circle, because I didn't understand how dignified transfers work. But for the Marines that come home, and to include Staff Sergeant Carden, that was killed in action at Firebase Bell in Iraq last year, he was brought home, and they all fly into Dover. And the Marines that come home are brought in by Marine Barracks Washington Marines. It's a couple-hour trip for our guys. They go up and they receive every Marine that comes home, whether they were killed in action or whatever it may be, if they're just deployed elsewhere, or if they're Marine security guard duty anywhere in the world. They come home to Dover Air Force Base and are received by the Barracks Marines. So understanding that that's how that process works now, going back and putting myself in my shoes then, it really makes it that much more special to know the type of Marines that are receiving our guys on the back end, to be able to pass them off to their families, so that they can be laid to rest either at Arlington or in their local graveyard.
So when you have this job at Marine Barracks, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance for lack of a better term for those listening, drill and ceremony, as we call it in the military.
Yeah.
And you get to do some cool things. You were at the inauguration for President Trump, and you did this stuff there. You get some other great stuff. But the somber part of your job is handling these ceremonies. Do you get numb to it at all?
So in the thick of it all, I guess in the hustle and bustle in the morning, they're usually some days we'll have up to 3, and the Marines actually do a lot more, because the officers are required for any officer, whether it's a lieutenant up to general, but for anybody PFC through all the enlisted Marines, they're those go on all the time. I mean, there's at least 2 or 3 of those a day, and our world famous body bearers are usually out there every day. But the duty weeks where I'm assigned to go out, the preparation phase and getting ready is kind of just making sure that all the Marines look sharp, that we have everybody we need, that the buses are on time. And then you get out there and you get set up and the family shows up, and then it all hits you that this is the most important thing that we do. And it's not the thing where you have that many spectators like we do on our Friday evening parades at Marine Barracks Washington parade deck, or Tuesday nights at Iwo Jima Memorial at Arlington Park. But it hits you. I mean, it hits you as soon as they get out, and you see the next of kin, and then the rest of the family that shows up, and them still going through the grieving process, because now it's usually no earlier than 4 months from the time that the Marine has passed away until they're able to be buried in Arlington. So the family has to relive that whole process again on that day. And so it's nice to be able to be there to represent their fallen loved one, and to lead them from either the chapel there at Fort Myer, or we call them transfer points, where the casket's delivered to a caisson, which is pulled by horse, and that's manned by the old guard out of Fort Myer. Those soldiers, they'll body bearers strap up the casket onto the caisson, and we march them, lead them to the gravesite where the pastor or the whoever's running the service does the gravesite memorial, and then we allow them to give them full honors and all that, and then march out and speak to the family and wish them well. And it's powerful. It's powerful.
Do a lot of the same emotions come rushing back for you personally?
They do. And now, given where we are, kind of back in the peacetime right now, we've got a lot of the World War II and Korea vets that have just lived wonderful lives and done many great things. And so not many KIAs right now, but you're just so happy to have a chance to meet the families of these Marines that have served in wars so long ago, and that have done so many incredible things, and just getting to read their biographies, or an award citation, and get a chance to see the families and all the support that comes out on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday afternoon. I mean, it's heartwarming to see that, because these aren't just on Saturdays when everybody has time off. So.
Well, I'm glad you emotionally uplifted this a little bit, because it was hard to take a turn there. But I do want to move on from your job at Marine Barracks, because obviously, again, let's just reiterate, it's just such a special thing, and it can be emotional and it can be very tough, but there are a lot of rewarding things that you do, and there's nothing better, I would think, at this point in time than meeting a proud family of a World War II vet or a Korean War vet, and being able to shake their hand and just say thank you, because everybody kind of forgets now that those wars actually happened, and it's just a different perspective, if you will. With that, I want to talk a little bit more about your football playing days, because you have a very special distinction in your football career at Navy. First of all, as an Army guy, boo Navy, go Army.
Rivalry.
It was a long time coming. You were on the Navy team that happened to beat Notre Dame back in, what was it, 2009, I think it was? Or was it 2010?
Let's see. It was 2007, 2008, and 2010. No, I was saying no. Yeah, it was freshman, sophomore. I was trying to just put the name or the dates with the class years. Yeah, freshman, sophomore, and senior year.
So bigger, exhilarating feeling: surviving combat deployment or beating Notre Dame?
Well, I definitely have to say that that combat, surviving combat, and those learning curves, that was definitely a major feat, and happy to have had the opportunity to do that. But I will say that the highs of beating Notre Dame, especially at Notre Dame, when they were ranked, sophomore year, they were ranked 19th in the country. We weren't, and beating them on their turf with touchdown Jesus in the background was a pretty amazing experience.
When you talked earlier about, the adrenaline rush of combat and, all the things that go on, and it's real, How similar was that to a football game?
Well, there's obviously a lot of parallels between football and the infantry, or just the military in general, because you learn teamwork, you learn focus, you learn mental toughness, you learn stamina, both mentally and physically, and so football definitely prepared me, and I think that's one of the ways that I relate, and one of the reasons why I decided to do what I'm doing is because of the parallels, like I said, and just the mentality, the type of guys that I was surrounded with growing up, even Pop Warner football, high school football, all the way through college, to being back around the same type of tough-nosed, hard-nosed guys that just want to get out there and get stuff done. So I think that prepared me mentally and kind of framed my reference for how the type of leader that I knew I already was, but how I needed to be in certain scenarios, whether it's, day-to-day garrison training or out during a workup or actually in Afghanistan or even in Japan. I mean, Japan was a different beast because that was more so like Camp Lejeune, which is where I was stationed in North Carolina, forward, if you will, to just training during the weeks and having some liberty time off. So it was a broad spectrum of ways that you had to go about focusing guys and different missions and different ways to prepare, and football definitely does that.
Tougher times, 2-a-days in the summer or boredom in a deployment?
Definitely the 2-a-days in the heat, which I just saw. I think they've banned 2-a-days in the NCAAs now, which is don't want to say that we're getting softer, but
we're changing.
Yeah, we're adapting.
When you look back on your football career, do you think you'd be as successful as a Marine officer without playing football?
I don't know so I guess one of the things that we all had in common, whether guys played college football or not, and just in my class in particular, going through infantry training, was either played a physical sport growing up, or interpersonal violence, wrestling, boxing, something like that, or we're an outdoorsman, whether it's fishing, hunting, backpacking, rock climbing, anything like that kind of give you that fieldcraft nature, if you will. Good with your hands, understand how to carry weight, packs, how to survive, I guess, if you will, outside, which was kind of different than playing a contact sport, but both had their own perks for helping guys out through the training and to prepare. And so don't know if I would have been as prepared, if you will. I think I was kind of naturally, I played baseball too, competitively growing up, and kind of decided I wanted to play football once I was able to gain some size later in high school. But just having a chance to be a part of a team at a young age, having a chance to be a leader early, kind of the team captain role, being involved in academic groups in high school, being involved in the church, going on and, kind of doing mission trips, spending time with like-minded individuals, people who were positive in nature, who were, wanted to get things done, wanted to go to college, wanted to make a difference. I think surrounding myself with those types of individuals and having the parenting that I was fortunate enough to receive growing up would have made the difference as well, because I wouldn't say it was only football that helped me to be successful as a leader of Marines. But it was a combination of my upbringing and everything that I was able to pick out along the way to put in my little toolkit.
Well, Trey, I'm sure your parents are very proud. Obviously, we're proud of you. We thank you for your service and, especially the job you're doing now, honoring those who have come before us, who are no longer with us, and certainly keeping the memories of those alive who are unfortunately still dying in combat around the globe. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. Appreciate your time as always here on the podcast, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.